Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, we have Geraldine Woods, former school teacher, author of 50 books, and specifically here to talk about 25 great sentences and how they got that way. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Oh, my pleasure. And you're also the host and blogger for Grammarian, I'm pronouncing it.
Grammarianinthecity.com.
That's such a fantastic site. So how did you get into teaching English? And I love the site because it has different pictures of things, like the one that I saw most recently was a sign saying, cookies for Satan instead of Santa.
Right. So I taught English for many years, and I've always been a writer. And my summer job, because teachers are off in the summer, so my summer job was always writing a book. That was partly in the early days of my career so that I could pay the rent. When my son was little, he's now a grown man with a family of his own. But when he was little, my husband and I each wanted the chance to be full-time parents. So we kept one teaching job and we traded it back and forth. And in order to pay the rent, the person who was home would, every time my son was in for a nap, I would be writing a book. And that was a way to earn extra money. But I really enjoyed it. And I've always enjoyed thinking about language. It's something that matters to me. I think language is a way that we express ourselves, but it also shapes the way we think. So in that sense, I think language is something worth knowing about. When I started 25 Great Sentences, I typed the word rhetoric into Google, and the word came back, the definitions came back as hot air, empty rhetoric, things like that. That was the autofill. And I thought, what a shame, because rhetoric is really getting your message across, having people understand and react in a certain way. It's persuasive in its effect on the reader or the listener. And therefore, if you understand how language is being manipulated to create a reaction, you get to maybe put that aside for a moment and decide what you really think. So even in the public arena, in our daily life, language matters that way. It shapes our relationships with other people, our relationships with our community. So I taught for many years and wrote for many years. And then when I stepped away from full-time teaching, I thought, got to get out of the house a little bit every day. And I live in Manhattan in New York City. So in non-pandemic times, I walk around and I take pictures of silly signs. And there's quite a lot of material out there. And then I use it in the blog, sometimes to explain what's wrong with it, and sometimes just to make fun. And the Satan cookies were obviously supposed to be Santa cookies, but some of them are a little bit more interesting. For example, there was a sign, Grandma's Punch, with no apostrophe. And I thought, well, why would I punch? Someone doesn't want to look at pictures of my grandkids. Is that why I would punch? And then it was a bar. So I thought, well, I think they mean grandma with an apostrophe, Grandma's Punch. So to name with a possessive. I have a lot of fun doing that. In Manhattan, where I live, there's a pretty nice combination sometimes of pretension and ignorance, and it's quite a lot of fun to make snarky remarks about that. I'm a New Yorker, so I snark tends to be my default tone of voice, and so I have a lot of fun with that. And then I had at a certain point in my life, I said, well, what would I actually like to write? And 25 Great Sentences is the fruit of that moment in my life, thinking about what matters to me, which is language and the way writers I admire or speeches I admire, or even things like Yoda. The way Yoda speaks is not an accident. In Star Wars, the Force and the community of Jedi is more important than the individual. So when he says, much to learn you still have to Count Dooku, he's really making a point not only about a personal struggle he's in at the moment, but he's making a point about priorities and values. So that's the kind of thing that really intrigues me, like how language is expressing more than the immediate message, but something bigger. And
it was surprising. When I picked up 25 great sentences, I wasn't sure if you were just going to tell me about 25 great sentences, but it's actually about 25 great styles of sentences and the way that they're put together, which I've never really thought about before. So it must be something in advanced literacy in college. But just the whole structure of the sentence, like especially those really long ones, a cross sentence, a parallelism, all of those things. And then the great examples, like my reading list has completely expanded from reading this book. And I love the exercises. At first, the first chapter, the exercises were frightening because I didn't want to fail. And then as I moved through every chapter, it became a challenge. And it was exciting because you gave so many great examples from so many different authors, from Shakespeare to Yoda. It was so much fun to read.
I'm so pleased that you enjoyed it, and thank you for your kind words. The exercises that you really can't fail. I have the teacher in me has to step in here. I think my goal with those exercises was to say to people, try something new. There's a way that we all have kind of habits of speech and writing, and there's so many possibilities. There's so many ways to change and affect how the sentence lands on an ear or on the mind. And as a writer myself, I know I can get into a rut, and I'd like to look and see, well, how has someone else done it? And I think that's always valuable to look and to think and to decide, well, maybe I should try something new today. And it'll either work for you or it won't. But I think that's fine. When I was teaching a class in writing poetry, I would always start with Bad Poetry Day. So I would tell the kids, come in and bring in the poem that you really hate. The one that, oh my goodness, I just don't want to read this. It's terrible. And then tell me why. And it was interesting because their own poetry writing changed as a result of that. Because when you see something you don't like, you don't do it anymore. And you may have been doing it automatically without thinking about it. So the goal is, as I mentioned at the beginning, is for both readers and writers to pay attention to language, and for writers especially to try something new and to see that you don't have to be there. There is not a fail. There's just, and now I sound like Yoda. There is no fail. Try, there is.
Well, I think it's that, and the way that the sentence is put together and following certain rules or steps along the way helps either the reader or the listener comprehend what you're trying to express. And I just love all the different examples. You're so witty. There are times when I just burst out laughing. And it made it enjoyable.
Very happy.
Well, no, it just made it enjoyable to read and learn about different areas to look at in your writing, the way that you talk to people, the way that you address people, the way that you try to convey an idea or a situation, and then just the variety of reading material. Some things I never heard of, so I had to look them up and check into it. Other things, I had heard of, so I could totally relate to what was going on. And then having read the examples that you gave me really helped me in those chapters with the exercises that were going on. And I felt a lot smarter at the end.
I learned a lot in writing this book, I have to say, because some things I knew. For example, many of the 25 in each chapter, just to explain to your viewers, in each chapter, one sentence I feature and I go into great detail on it. And then I give other examples so they can see, readers can see how the same technique in the hands of different writers really comes across with power, but in a very different way. And just to give an example of many examples of the way these techniques have been used. So I think that in general in language, when people go to, first of all, okay, I'm a grammarian, I've written grammar books. If I want to kill a party, that's all I have to say. If I say I study grammar or I teach grammar, no one will talk to me because they think of it as a list of things that they have to do or that they can't do. That's sad to me. That's unfortunate. There are grammar rules. There's no question there's standard English, and that's to make things sort of seamless and to make meaning flow without having you be surprised by something someone said. That's one function of grammar. But all the really interesting stuff happens when you break a rule. That's where you can get someone's attention and you can you can emphasize or you can subvert a meaning. I'll give you an example. There's a sentence which is not in this book. It's in the next book. There's a sequel coming out aimed just at teachers and how to make lesson plans out of this, because I was a teacher for so many years. But there's a sentence about teenagers and their tendency to take risks. And I happen to love teenagers. I taught teenagers for most of my adult life, and I think they're a really interesting age group because they're willing to try things and they don't see impossibility, they see possibility. So the sentence calls them inspiring, sleepwalking, disgusting, and masterful. Okay. So sleepwalking and disgusting are kind of match. And there's a third one in there with ing, but right now I can't retrieve the sentence. So there's 3 ings. And then there's masterful, and it's tucked into the middle of that. There's a list of 4, and it's tucked in the middle. And when you read it, the masterful stands out because it looks different. Now, in terms of grammar, that would be breaking the rule of parallelism, because parallelism says you make things match when they're doing the same thing in the sentence. And it kind of makes that seamless, just kind of flow along with it. But when you have that masterful that doesn't match, it stops you for a second. And as I read that sentence, which is about the tendency of teenagers to take risks, I thought, this is really perfect because they are disgusting. Sometimes they are sleepwalking a lot of times because we never seem to find a school schedule that matches their biology. But when they're masterful, you see young people, when they have a cause, they do it just right. It's so inspiring. And that's, I think, the reason the writer broke parallelism there. So the writer, he broke a rule, but he broke a rule in the service of meaning, in the service of the effect on the reader or the listener. And I just think that's incredible.
I think it's incredible the way that you laid it out, because I don't believe that when I was in school, this was laid out in such a way that it actually makes it easier than the way I learned in high school and college, because I didn't think about the way the sentence was formatted. I thought about delivering the message.
Right. And it is always about delivering the message. There's no question of that. But a lot of energy, think about the advertising industry or even political speeches or any sort of speech when you're arguing with someone in a relationship about whose turn it is to take the garbage out or something really simple like that. The message is important, but how you express yourself, what the message, how the medium and the message are both important. And so my role in this book and as a teacher is to make people think about what the language is actually doing. What technique is being used, and then you can either try it yourself or when as a reader or a listener, you can kind of put that aside and think about what that message is.
Well, how do these techniques play out when an author is writing a story or even one based on fiction?
Yeah, well, many of the examples in the book are from fiction. Some are from poetry, some are from ads, some are from films, many are from nonfiction. I think that if you're writing a story, you probably have a plot or a character in mind, and you want to use a lot of the techniques we generally speak about to get your meaning across. But then when you look at it again and you think, well, I want to emphasize this or de-emphasize something. I want to change something. I want a different impact. That's when you can, if you've practiced a technique, you might use it unconsciously, or you might consciously go back during the revision process. For example, if it's okay, I'll just look at a sentence from Jane Austen. So Jane Austen, I think, is one of the more vicious writers on the planet. I really love her for that reason. I think that she looks very prim and proper, and you might think that you're looking at something that has a lot of dignity in it. But in fact, what you're really looking at is somebody who wants to eviscerate you. So here's a sentence from Northanger Abbey. She had found some acquaintance, had been so lucky as to find in them the family of a most worthy old friend, and as the completion of good fortune, had found these friends by no means so expensively dressed as herself. So this is a character who is desperate for a social life. She's in a spa, and she's rather wealthy, and she doesn't know anyone there. So she spends a lot of time complaining that she has no one to talk to. And when she does find someone to talk to, at first you think, well, she's following all these rules of society and she's upholding the values. So it's a nice family. They've known each other for a long time. Although later Jane Austen says that they were such good friends, they had been content not to see each other for more than 10 years. But the whole thing is going along this way, and then suddenly she slips the scalpel in to make the cut. The really good thing about them is that they were not as well dressed as the character who is so happy to be with them. So she shows you how hypocritical people are. And when you make that U-turn, Austen uses it often to say, oh, yes, I'm for society. I'm really not. And society's rules. And I think that if you're doing something like that in your own writing, and you have a character who's a rebel, or a character who is kind of sly and dissecting someone else, perhaps not overtly, then you get a chance to try that sort of U-turn structure in your own sentences. And it can be a very effective technique, because you sort of tell people, especially if you're in with someone who may not agree with you, oh yes, we're all in this together, and then suddenly, but we're not. And then it makes the listener or the reader think.
It was really surprising to me, because at first I started to look at it more like a textbook, but then with your Jane Austen type of quips as we went along, or challenging us to try other things. I read at least 5 to 7 novels a month. So I really started to notice these type of techniques in the novels I was reading, and it drew me into it that much more, to see how far they would take it, to see if they repeated the technique throughout, or if they used it in key places. So thank you.
Well, that makes me so happy to hear that. That's one of my goals, is to make people more aware of language, and particularly people who are interested in and who read a lot, and people who like to write themselves, to just make people aware of all the possibilities that are out there. So I'm pleased that was an effect on you.
Well, I think it's for anybody that reads a lot, definitely for somebody who writes a lot. I think it's the go-to book that you want to read once a year to make sure that you're staying in line, that you're communicating effectively with people, that you're rereading what you write, because those can have some really bad results.
That's when you end up with Satan cookies.
I know, those are so funny. It was that, and just the amount. So I think all the places that you quote, I was like, wow, this woman must really read a lot more than I do. But it gave me good references to go back to for other books that I haven't read yet that I wanted to read.
I'm happy about that as well. as a teacher, so first of all, I've been collecting sentences for decades. So I do read a lot, but I didn't read all of these books in the last year when I was working on this book.
Right.
Many of these sentences were already in my file cabinet. When I first became a teacher, I showed up in front of the class, and my first thought was, oh my goodness, I'm the grown up. I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. And I had no idea what I was doing. So, like many rookie teachers, I started with the big ideas. So the kids were reading Lord of the Flies, and I would say something like, well, tonight, go home and describe your ideal society. And I thought I would get this really nuanced discussion of the tension between individual liberty and communal responsibility. And instead, I got answers like everyone will be happy, no one will have homework. And so starting with a big idea was not always going to work for me. In fact, it seldom worked for me. Never abandoned it completely, but it was not my go-to thing. So instead, I would start with a small one sentence, and I would let them look at that sentence. So, for example, in a different class, when I was reading Mrs. Dalloway, there's a part when someone calls her a perfect hostess. And I said to the kids, well, what is a perfect hostess? What do you think about? And then they would talk to me about making guests feel comfortable and then lying and things like that, like little social lies. And then we started to say, well, would you want to be known as a liar? Is this way, And so starting from that one phrase and expanding outward was much more productive. So I ended up with beginning my lessons with one sentence and unpacking that with the kids and then expanding outward. And so I had a lot of sentences in my file cabinet. I did, however, do a lot of reading. For example, I have a chapter on coinage, coining new words. And I thought, well, the people who do that a lot are sports writers. I like baseball very much, and I love sports writing. There used to be a Yankee announcer, Phil Rizzuto, and he was a player before he was an announcer. And he gave an interview when he said, I made that error because I was nonchalanting the ball. And I thought, that's perfect. Nonchalanting is not a verb, but it should be. I mean, it's exactly what you need there. So when I was writing the chapter on coinage, I looked at sports writers that I was not as familiar with. And I found wonderful things. So Red Smith and Roger Angell and just W.C. Hines, they were wonderful. And I found a lot of coined words there. So some of it I looked for. I knew Yoda reversed sentences. I wasn't sure who else did until I went back and started looking. And then I found a lot. So once I think as you alluded to, if you open your eyes as a reader, all of a sudden they're everywhere. And that's really fun to do. At least for me, that's fun. I am a word nerd.
Oh, no, I sincerely enjoyed the book. And I was just surprised at how much I still had to learn. And just what a great reminder of things to look for everywhere. And then going to your blog and looking at all the posts on different mistakes that people make. And it's in public. It's like, how many people looked at it in the process before that happened? Especially
I know.
signage.
I know. And some of them, I mean, obviously some are typos, like the Santa cookies, Satan cookies. Well, that's easy. But some of them, I still don't know exactly what it means. I've seen some signs and I end up scratching my head and saying, what is this actually? And what are they trying to tell me?
Oh, I know. There was one when they were going to kill the pedestrians so I could pass safely.
I know. I still don't know what that means. It was something like, for your safety, 3 pedestrians killed here. And I thought, okay, they're murdering people to keep me safe. Like, no, thank you. I'll stay home. Don't worry about don't kill anybody on my account. Yeah, there are some like that. And then some are, as I said, in my neighborhood in particular, in Manhattan, there's quite a lot of signs that are trying to entice you. And they're quite silly if you really think about them. There was one advertising facial with 26 minerals. And I thought, okay, first of all, why 26? And secondly, what minerals are we talking? Like uranium? Like what, and why would I want 26 minerals? And which ones would I want? And it made me realize there was one I did about, I think you are what you think you eat. And there were all kinds of pretentious signs. Like all of a sudden it's an artisanal fish. Well, what is an artisanal fish? I mean, I could see organic or, line caught or sustainably farmed or whatever they want to say, something about the environment, but artisanal fish. And I can see people saying, oh, that's probably, so I should pay more for an artisanal fish without having any clue what an artisanal fish actually is. And then I went to, on purpose, I went to a neighborhood with a supermarket with much lower prices. And I saw a sign on sale was yellow cheese and canned ham. And I thought, well, they're more honest. I mean, it is yellow. I don't know why it's yellow. It could be total food dye, but at least they're being honest about it as opposed to artisanal fish.
Definitely. So how did you write, before we wrap up, how long did it take you to write the 50 plus books that you have authored?
I started the professional career. I started when my son was little, and we had to make rent payments, and we took turns working. So I'd sit on the side of the sandbox, watch him with one eye and write a book with the other hand, and he'd go in for a nap, and I'd type it up, and so it was sort of like that. And then as a teacher, every summer, it was my summer job. So I'd be teaching during the winter, and I'd try to get a book contract in the early part of the early part of the spring, and then write it over the summer and then go back to work. So I'm fairly fast. And then in more recent years, I started writing dummies books, which I totally love to write. They're a lot of fun. You can have real information, but you can make jokes about it. And I just love doing that. And then this one I took, I had many sentences, but the writing of it took about a year. So I took my time on this one because I just wasn't really enjoying it, and it's very close to my heart.
You can tell there's so much love put into it, and it was so insightful and challenging and fun. It was learning, but it was all of the other best adjectives.
Well, thank you.
It was just surprising how enlightening it could be, how it introduced me to other authors that I hadn't thought to explore yet. And revisited people like Jane Austen, who I've loved in the past.
I'm happy about that because I think that these writers really deserve a wide audience. Some of them already have it, obviously, but I think maybe some who are lesser known or some who are known for other reasons. You don't think, for example, of Abigail Adams or Mae West or Groucho Marx as writers, but they were, and because we all use language. And so looking at how a non-writer, Phil Rizzuto, he's coined a word, nonchalanting a baseball. That's terrific. So I think we can all be writers. I don't think we can fail. And I think we should all just try a lot of different things and a lot of as readers as well.
Definitely. Thank you for sharing so much about yourself, your work, and 25 great sentences.
Thank you so much, Denise Marie. It's been my pleasure to be here with you.
My pleasure. Until next time, keep asking questions. And whether you want to be a better reader, a better writer, or just a better communicator, 25 Great Sentences is the book that you'll have on your shelf for years to come. We'll see you soon.